Okay, I think we're all set up and ready to roll here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. You know what? I probably need to turn up my microphone. I don't know if it's set there or not. Probably need to fix my sound settings. Hold on. That should be working right there. Hopefully we're all set. Yep, microphone looks like it's all good. Still getting the hang of all of this live stuff, but it's getting quicker and things are moving faster. So, awesome. Let me press this button over here to make sure the Instagram stream goes live. We're all set over there. We're on TikTok. We are on Twitch. We are on YouTube. We are on Facebook. We are go. All right. Good evening. Welcome to the show. We got a lot to talk about in Utah politics today. I am your host, Brian Schott. I am an independent journalist. I've been covering Utah politics for more than 25 years. So I can help you understand what's happening, help you put some perspective on it, and maybe predict what's happening next. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have anything you would like to me to discuss, go ahead and put it in the chat. I've got the chat open on TikTok. I've got the chat open on Instagram. I'm looking at all of my other platforms as well. We're live on Twitch, we're live on Facebook, and we're live on YouTube. So love to hear what you have to say. Your questions about Utah politics. The big news, it is redistricting, and we got underway today up at the Utah State Capitol. Stuff actually happened last night, and we'll go over that in a minute. You might hear some hooting and hollering in the background, and that's my dogs. My wife just got home from work, and we have schnauzers, and they're very vocal when she walks in. Oh, question right off the bat here from Instagram that says, is there any way to get the legislature to adopt the map recommended by the Independent Redistricting Commission? Short answer is no. That's not going to happen. I know there's a lot of people who would like to see it, and I'm going to explain why. We'll get to that in a second, but the short answer is no. But redistricting is underway. The Independent Redistricting Commission of the legislature had their first meeting on Monday morning on into the afternoon. They took a break in the middle. And a lot happened, and we'll go over it because it's complicated, but it's important for you to understand. And we'll get to that in a second. But the first thing that happened was yesterday, Sunday afternoon, they released 5 proposed maps. And of those maps, I plugged them into my software, my mapping software, and then using detailed election results at the precinct level from the 2024 presidential election, the 2022 U.S. Senate election, the 2020 presidential election, and the 2020 gubernatorial election, kind of got an idea of what the partisan makeup of these maps. Colin DeFord says, can you chat about the poison pill and what it means to the maps? Yes, I will get to it in just a second. But first, let's take a look at these maps that they released. So let me bring that up here. These are the maps. There's 5 of them, option A, B, C, D, and E. And they were released by the Independent Commission on Sunday. And let's go over what they would look like. And on every single map, well, 4 of the 5 maps, there is one district that went to, or that would go to the Democratic candidate, or would be carried by the Democratic candidate in the presidential election and by the independent candidate in the U.S. Senate election, and sometimes 2. So this is option A. And if you look at it, instead of splitting Salt Lake County 4 times, it splits it twice. That's the big problem with the current map, or one of the big problems, is it splits Salt Lake County into 4 pieces. And under the rules of Prop 4, which lawmakers have to follow, and they're very salty about that. We'll explain in a second. They cannot split. They have to minimize the split of the counties, and there's no way to make Salt Lake County its own congressional district. That cannot happen. And the reason why it can't happen is because there's too many people. You have to have equal population on the 4 districts, and there's just too many people in Salt Lake County. So it's going to have to be split. And it gets split once under these map proposals. So let's take a look at option A. If you look at District 1, Trump carries that by 28.1%. Mike Lee would have carried it in 22. Trump would have carried it in 2020, and Spencer Cox would have carried it in 2020 as well. Here's the district right here, District 2. This is the one that's interesting because it takes the western half of Salt Lake County and goes out to the West Desert to the Nevada border with Tooele. So it's basically combining the west side of Salt Lake County with Tooele. And under that map, Kamala Harris would have carried that district by, she wouldn't have carried it by much, but she would have carried it by just under 2 points in 2024. Biden would have carried it by about 4 points, and Evan McMullin would have carried it in 2022 by 12 points. District 3 would also kind of be competitive, or at least be on the cusp of being competitive. Trump carried that district in 2024 by just over 9 points, or would carry it by just over 9 points. Evan McMullin would carry it over Mike Lee in 2022 by just over 1 point, and Trump would have carried it in 2020 by about 8 points. Now remember, under the current maps, Donald Trump carried every single district by at least 19 points. So when you're looking at a map that Trump is carrying by 9 points, that shaves 10 points off his margin right there. And you've also got Kamala Harris carrying that. Okay. So that's option A. We do have a question on Instagram, a couple of them. Someone said, can you give more detail on Brammer's bill? That's coming. We'll get to that today. It's complicated, but I wanted to go over these map proposals first, so I'll speed up on that, okay? Someone says, don't forget that none of these maps follow Proposition 4, the split municipalities too much, which is against it. Maybe. I mean, you have to split Salt Lake County. There's no way to not do that. Mountain Adventures writes, why do the legislators say the maps created cannot be used? There hasn't been a new census and those maps were drawn. They can't be used because, and we'll get to it, it's basically under a bill that they're going to pass in the legislative session. It's Brammer's bill, and we'll get to that in a second, okay? So let me bring up map option B. This is option B. It looks a little bit more like what we have right now, although Salt Lake County is only split twice again, and you do have the west side of Salt Lake County out to Tooele here. And District 4 is the Democratic-leaning district. Kamala Harris would have carried it by just under 3 points. Joe Biden would have carried it by 5.5 points. Evan McMullin by 13.6 points. But if you look at District 2, that's competitive again. That one's in the neon green, or I don't know what color that is. Donald Trump would have carried that by about 11 points. Mike Lee would have only carried it by 0.69%. Nice. And Donald Trump would have carried that one by 9.88 points. So again, remember, Donald Trump carried all 4 of our districts in 2024 by 19 points at least. So to see a district where he's only carrying it by 11 points and 10 points, that's fascinating. All right, going to bring up the next map, but would like to encourage you, share this live, get other people who might have some questions about Utah politics, let them know that's what I'm doing right now on the show. And I'm happy to do that. Okay. Option C. Again, we've got Salt Lake County split on the west side out to the Nevada border. But that's a Trump district, okay? If you look at it, that's a district that would have this is a map that doesn't have any Democrats carrying the district. District 2 is the most competitive of them all, with Trump carrying that by about 6.4 points. In 2020, he would have prevailed by 5.8 points. District 3, that's even closer. Donald Trump carrying that by 2.28 points, and in 2020 by half a point. So this option C, although it favors Republicans, it's probably the most competitive one that we have. Okay. In terms of Republicans winning, with Democrats have a chance of flipping those districts. Option D, and I had to zoom in a little bit here on the Salt Lake County split. This one sort of splits Salt Lake County north-south. And in District 3, which is down at the bottom of the screen, Kamala Harris would have carried that by just about 4 points. Biden would have carried it by 4.5 points in 2020. And then District 4 would also be fairly competitive, or could be competitive for Democrats, with Donald Trump prevailing in 2024 by just under 9 points and by 8.5 points in 2020. Again, that's 10 points less than what he carried his lowest percentage of winning in Salt Lake County under the current maps. Question from TikTok: why are they splitting Salt Lake County? I mentioned that earlier. They have to. They have to split Salt Lake County because there are too many people there. Essentially, districts have to have just over there's about 800,000 people is what the math is, using the 2020 census numbers. So that's why they have to split it. There's no way to keep it whole. I know there's a lot of people would like to keep it whole, but they can't. Okay, last map here. Last map proposal, and we can come back to these later. This one, essentially, Salt Lake County is kind of half a district. Half a district is Salt Lake County, and that's District 2. Kamala Harris would have carried that district by 4 points. Biden, 4.27. And then over in District 4, if you look at that, Donald Trump would have carried that by just 4.7 points and 3.8 points in 2020 against Joe Biden. So, those are the map proposals, and they're fairly competitive. I don't know if any of these maps are going to be the ones that I don't know if any of these maps are going to be the ones that they actually pick, because there's a lot of maps being submitted on the legislature's website right now, and somebody could put one in there, and that's the one that they decide to put forward. They have to make a decision on those maps, or end the committee hearings on the maps on Thursday, and then the public comment period, the 10 days of public comment, opens. Colin DeFord on YouTube asks, which option do I prefer of A through E? I really don't have I'm not going to answer that. I don't have a preference. Here's actually, I'm just going to say that I don't have a preference, and I'm choosing not to ask because the story's not about me. I'm just trying to give you the information that will help you make the best informed decision. Okay, so what happened today up at the Utah Capitol? They had their first meeting of the Legislative Redistricting Committee. And in that committee, first of all, it was really clear that the Republicans were not happy to be there. They did not want to be there at all. They were really cranky about it. The Senate chair, Scott Sandell from Tremonton, he led the redistricting commission when they did this the last time in 2021. He was the Senate chair back then. He started the committee hearing by saying they were there under protest because they don't think the court should have thrown out the maps. But they're drawing the maps because they don't want to forfeit the opportunity to have maps considered when they make a final decision on this. So they were not happy. And a lot of the public commenters really took him to task over that, over the fact that he didn't want to be there. They were really, really salty about that. And they also made it a point to, it's also clear to me that they're also not happy about being forced to follow the rules of Prop 4. Okay? They have to follow those rules. And those rules include you can't use partisan data to draw the maps. You have to try and not split counties and cities. You have to minimize those splits. And as I said before, Salt Lake County, you have to split it because there's too many people, but you have to try to minimize those splits. You have to try to keep communities of interest together. You're looking for compactness. If you look at some of those maps, I mean, they cover the entire southern part of the state. you're just going to have to do that because of there's no people there. I mean, there's more people along the population centers along the Wasatch Front, and then when you get farther out in the state, there's just no people. So you have to make those districts bigger. When we only had 3 districts, we only got our 4th district in 2011. So before that, we had 3 districts, and the 3rd congressional district, as it existed from 2001 to 2011, was larger than the state of Alabama in terms of total area. So it's almost impossible to have a very, very small district. So anyway, they're really unhappy about the fact that they have to follow the rules under Prop 4. And they've made it a point to really stress the fact that they're not using partisan data to draw these maps. And I will add a wink wink to that because, come on. But they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to talk about it. Anytime anybody would even slightly suggest using partisan data or referencing something partisan, Senator Sandel would just slam the door on that discussion. He was pretty strict about that. Another question, Hillary Swingle on TikTok. Why are they not using the original maps the independent committee submitted, or are they? They don't have to. I suppose they could consider them, but they're not going to. And I think I'm going to talk about Senator Bramble's bill, which you really need to pay attention to. This is important stuff. It's boring, it's complicated, but it's important. And you really need to understand what they're trying to do here, okay? So, when Prop 4 was passed, the original language in Prop 4 says that that in order to assess whether a map is fair, whether it unfairly gives an advantage to a candidate, a political party, you're not allowed to do that because this is an anti-gerrymandering measure, right? So you can't draw a map in a way to favor a political party, a candidate, or an incumbent. And in order to assess that, the statute right now says you have to use the best available data to evaluate the maps, including, and I'm quoting here, measures of partisan symmetry, okay? Now, partisan symmetry, it's kind of like a political fairness test, okay? This is a concept that's been in political science for a while. They developed it back in the 90s to do some map drawing in Ohio. And it's a political fairness test, and it works like this, okay? You have a hypothetical state, okay? And you look at the statewide election. And if Party A gets 60% of the vote in the election and then wins 60% of the seats, then Party B should also get 60% of the seats if they were to win 60% of the vote. That's partisan fairness, okay? That's partisan symmetry. It's used to identify whether district maps unfairly favor one party or another. And it's really complicated. I spent hours on Sunday evening trying to wrap my head around what this bill from Senator Brammer does. But that's what it does, or it purports to do. Because he takes that idea, that language, partisan symmetry, it's in the statute. And I think Republicans saw an opening and they're trying to exploit it with this legislation, okay? Because the statute, when it says partisan symmetry, it doesn't say how you look at that. And there are a lot of ways to look at how a map is drawn, right? There are a lot of ways to look at how a map is drawn, to look at the fairness. There's something called the efficiency gap, and that's one that a lot of people like to use because, I'm not a math guy. Essentially, it looks at wasted votes. If you didn't vote for the winning candidate in a district, then that's a wasted vote, and it does something with the wasted votes to determine partisan fairness. And a lot of political scientists really like the efficiency gap, okay? But Utah's the first state to put the term partisan symmetry in the code when it comes to drawing maps. But there's no guidance on how you determine that. Now, as someone just pointed out on Instagram, Prop 4 says measures, not measure, okay? What Brammer's trying to do is rewrite Prop 4. He's rewriting the law so that there's one test. There's one test that they're going to use to determine whether a map it has partisan symmetry or not. And what he does is he creates this really complicated mathematical formula to assess whether these maps meet the partisan symmetry standard required by Prop 4. Okay? Jay on TikTok asks, are they calling a special session for this, or is this all being written for the January session? This is going to happen in a special session that's supposed to take place on October 6th or end by October 6th because they have to submit their map to the court by then. Because all of this whole process has to be done by November 10th in order to be in place for the next election. That's the deadline set by the Lieutenant Governor's office. All of it has to be done by November 10th. Okay? All right, back to Brammer's proposal. And this is really, really complicated. What Brammer's bill does in order to meet this partisan symmetry standard is it requires or it calculates the average Republican and Democratic vote share from the three most recent statewide elections for U.S. President, Governor, Attorney General, State Treasurer, and State Auditor. You'll notice U.S. Senator's not in there, and I'll explain why in a minute. But you take the average Republican and Democratic vote share from the three most recent statewide elections of those. So for this purpose, you would look at President, Governor, Attorney General. Okay? I have to switch my own view here really quick so I can pull up another article I wrote on this. I write a lot of articles. But so what that does, theoretically, if you're averaging the 2024 election results for President, Governor, Attorney General, that gives the GOP an average vote share of 56.7, okay? Really should get out my whiteboard. Actually, I'm going to go grab that. Hang on. It's just back here. To grab the whiteboard so we can talk about this. Okay? So, because I think this will help. So, averaging those three elections, U.S. President, Governor, Attorney General, it gives the GOP an average of 56.70%, okay? Right there. GOP, 56.7. All right? Average the Democratic performance in those three races, and you get an average of 31.31%, okay? So that's the average. So how do you calculate what the partisan gap is, or the partisan index? Well, what you do is you then subtract, you either add or subtract that number from 50, okay? So the partisan index for the GOP would be plus 6.7%, right? So the partisan index for the GOP is plus 6.7, and the partisan index for the Democrats is minus 18.69%, all right? So these two numbers on the bottom here, 6.7% and 18.69%. That's the partisan index. And what you do is, this is all an attempt to make elections in each district act like the election results statewide. That's essentially what they're doing here. They're trying to make each district mirror the election results statewide. So there is a gap between those two numbers of, what is that? Almost 30 points. Almost 30 points between those two numbers. And that's the gap a district can have in order to be considered fair, okay? That's what they're doing here with this bill. They are saying they need to artificially inflate, or they can artificially inflate the Democratic vote total, their theoretical vote total in a district, and artificially lower the Republican vote total in a district to get to 50-50, and then that map is considered fair. Okay? Hillary on TikTok says, that's bogus. Okay, well, wait a second. I'm not done, okay? Because there's another little bit in there that if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss. If you look at the bill on line 55 and 56, it says that this statewide average, remember, I had it at 56.7, okay? It says that if there is a candidate, an independent candidate in the general election who attempted to win the nomination of a political party in a primary election, in that same election, then that candidate's votes are allocated to that party. Phil Lyman, people. Phil Lyman got 13.57% of the vote in 2024. Because what? He tried to get the Republican nomination for governor. He didn't get it. He ran as an independent. And they're saying, well, all the votes that he got would have been Republicans anyway, so we should add his vote total into our number. Because that's fair. That's what we need to do. So let's recalculate. Actually, if you take that number, if you take Phil Lyman's 13.57% of the vote, put it back into the calculation, the GOP average vote share is not 56.7. It jumps to 61.23%. Okay? So that's the number right there with Phil Lyman. 61.23. That's 11 points more than 50% rather than 6.7 points, which makes the gap even larger that they can fit a district into and say that it's fair. The gap between 11.23 and 18.69, that's more than 30 points right there. You can have a 30-point gap between Republicans and Democrats under this formula, looking at those numbers, and have a map considered fair. I spoke to an expert today, and they said it's most likely that if you plugged the maps that the judge just threw out, okay, the maps the judge threw out, that Donald Trump carried by 19 points at a minimum, it's likely that those maps would be considered fair under this formula. That's what this does, okay? So they're basically saying Phil Lyman, his votes would have gone to the Republican anyway, so we're just going to do that. Mike Deaver says, how do you calculate an account for unaffiliated independents, which is huge in Utah, or does it not come into play? It comes out of the statewide vote total. Comes out of that statewide vote total, okay? The average of the 3 statewide elections. Because it's not only Republicans who vote for Republicans, and so that's how they calculate. So it's that average. Jason Meekum on Instagram says, I'm going to eat my goddamn shoe. Right? Right? So anyway, let me get to some of the questions, and we can talk a little bit more about Brammer's bill, because there's more to it. There's more to it. It's not just the calculation that's messed up. It's what it does with this, okay? Colin DeFord says, to be this complicated, the legislature must be paying some nice outside consultants to help with all these details, so they have to disclose these costs. Eventually, they probably will. I've heard some things. I can't really report on them, but until I confirm them. But I've heard something is going on, and I'll report it when I can nail it down. Melissa on YouTube, what I want to know is why they literally hired one guy to be their expert. I don't trust Utah Republicans to act in good faith. The person who was their expert today at the hearing is a gentleman by the name of Sean Trende. And he, if you read Real Clear Politics, he's their political expert, or their political analyst, their chief political analyst. He's the Republican go-to guy when it comes to redistricting. He does it in a lot of states. He testifies for Republicans. He was one of their experts in this trial that ended up throwing out their maps and invalidating their move on Prop 4. So that's Sean Trende. I've been trying to figure out how much they paid him for that, and I can't find anything yet, but as soon as I do, I will. Okay, Desiree Curtis on TikTok says, McMullen's votes in the presidential election would skew these numbers too. Well, that was 2016. It wouldn't count. That would not count because it would be back then. It's the three most recent. So we'd be looking at the 2024 election. Also, with McMullen, you'll notice, and I said this earlier, you'll notice that they did not put U.S. Senate as one of the statewide elections that they're going to calculate. They gave some really circular answer, but basically, because if they did, they might have, well, it wouldn't count this time, but they might have, if you had another Evan McMullen situation, you'd have to calculate, he got 42% in that election. You don't want to put that in the Democrats' statewide calculations. So U.S. Senate is excluded specifically. It wouldn't have worked. I mean, this provision in the bill that claws back Phil Lyman's votes is very, very narrowly worded. It is incredibly. It is worded so narrowly and so specifically that it can only apply to Phil Lyman. And Republicans did this earlier this year at the state convention when they were talking about their delegate allocation, because they have a formula that they use when they allocate which counties get a certain number of delegates. That's just an internal party thing, but they did it so they absorbed Phil Lyman's votes into that total. Otherwise, it would have skewed things massively for them, and how and given more delegates to less populous areas than they deserved. And they're just doing the same thing here, but it comes to partisan vote share. Anyway, Utah Mountain Adventures on Instagram. Do you think Brammer's legislation will pass? Yeah, it will pass. Okay, so I want to get to this question from President Jenks, or this is comment. So she'd say, hope the judge tosses this out. Do you think the judge will allow this? The way that this is written, it feels like the judge is going to have no choice but to use it. Because here's what they're going to do. Let me get a drink real first. By the way, Oklahoma Sooners, boomer. Okay, so here's what they're going to do. This bill has an immediate effective date if it passes with 2/3 in both the Senate and the House, okay? Meaning, if it gets 2/3 in both the Senate and the House, which it probably will because the Republicans have more than 2/3 in each house, and the governor signs it, which he probably will because his veto will get overridden, it goes into effect immediately. So what they are going to do is they're going to pass this thing, and then they'll submit their map to the court. And if you look at the way the bill is written, and I'm trying to find the exact line here. It's on line 96 of the bill. And I'm going to put the link to the bill. Language. Whether the legislature or commission complies with this section shall use, not may, shall use the partisan bias test described in this section to determine whether a map unduly favors or disfavors any incumbent elected official, candidate, or prospective candidate for elective office or any political party for purposes of a congressional map. Right there. They're going to pass this thing. It's going to go into effect immediately. I'm pretty sure that the game plan is to pass it, have it go into effect, and then they'll submit their maps to the court, and this will be the law. And the judge is going to have to follow this because that's the law. Any judicial review of a congressional map shall use the partisan bias test described in this section. They're not going to have any chance. There's no choice. They're going to pass this bill that they dropped late last night and discussed today. This is what they do in special sessions. Special sessions are really dangerous. They love to ram through stuff really without much discussion. If they had to put this through in a regular session, there would be time for the media to report on it, time for you to get upset about it, time for people to call their reps. Not with a special session. We saw this bill late last night. It got discussed in committee today. They're probably not going to discuss it again because they're going to be talking about the maps. The committee doesn't even have to take a vote on it. It can show up in the special session and, oh, it already had a committee hearing. Boom, everybody votes on it. It's through. Buckle up. That's what they're going to do here. Beth Aroni on TikTok says, can we get a referendum to get rid of special sessions? No. No, you can't. Because that would take a constitutional amendment. And guess who the only people who can propose a constitutional amendment are? The legislature. Citizens cannot propose a constitutional amendment. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Hillary Swingle says this isn't democracy. They're playing by the rules. The rules, they just know how to use the rules to their benefit. You know? The only way to change it is to change your lawmakers, and that's going to take a long time, especially with this. Colin DeFord writes, how did they figure this out? Is this a template in some other state? No. Nobody... there's not, no, they saw the language, partisan symmetry, and that's the opening, and that's what they're going to exploit. Even though Prop 4 says Prop 4 says that you use several measures to determine the fairness of a map. It doesn't say what those are. Doesn't say what those are, but it says that you should use several. It says methods or something along those lines. They're changing it. They're changing this law to say you're going to use one method. You're going to use the method that we say, and it's the method that we that's going to help us out the most. Oh, and get this, okay? I spoke to an expert today who pointed out that the person who came up with this idea of partisan symmetry, determining that a party should win if it wins X number of votes, then or X percent of votes, it should get X percent of seats. The person who came up with that has specifically said this does not work when you have a state that is lopsided electorally. That analysis does not work. It does not work well in a state like Utah where everything is so lopsided. They shouldn't be using it here, but they're going to. So that's what, but this is the system that we're going to use to determine whether these maps are fair or not. That's where we're at. please, I'm here for a little while longer. I want to take your questions. I want to talk a little bit about this. A number of people have asked why they're not going to use the independent maps. Or the maps that were put forward by the Independent Commission. Well, if you were to look at them and assess them under this partisan symmetry, they would not meet that criteria. Why? Because there's one district in almost all of them that gives the Democrats a big advantage, and that would not work under this formula. So even if they did do that, they wouldn't be able to use them. That's why they're not using those maps, because they won't work under this analysis. They just won't. You can comment on the maps. There's it's at the redistricting website. I'll try to get that link up on my website or put it out on my socials at some point. What I think this bill from Brammer does, what I think this is not only an attempt to, determine, to sort of cook the books, to have a built-in Republican advantage, but I also think that it's an attempt to keep the judge from throwing out whatever map they approve during next month's special session, or it's a bid to prolong litigation and maybe keep the 2021 maps in place while this all plays out, which is what they wanted to do in the first place. I've been trying to game plan this, but say the legislature passes a map that meets this standard, but you've still got a massive GOP advantage in all 4 districts. Well, it passes the test. It passes the partisan symmetry test. If the judge says no and throws it out, lawsuit. They go running either to the Utah Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court trying to keep the maps in place. Or if the judge says, sure, this is how it works. The judge says, my hands are tied, I have to take this map. Then they get to keep that map and put it in place. And then the plaintiffs will have to try and sue, but it's too late to really work through all of those appeals, so this map is going to be in place. So I think it's either going to be whatever map that lawmakers approve in the special session October 6th or the map in 2021. But again, for those of you who don't know me, I'm quite the pessimist. I always expect the worst possible outcome for things, and then I'm rarely disappointed. But that's just me. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. Let's see. President Jinx. It's like one seat they're having a meltdown about, like, geez, GOP. Look at the margins in Congress, though. Why do you think that President Trump, is pushing Texas and Missouri and Indiana to redistrict in the middle of the cycle? Because they are afraid they're going to lose control of the House. It's that razor thin. So one seat in Utah could really, cause those plans to go off the tracks. That's why they're doing it. Stewart on YouTube. The same argument was made when Oregon Dems were defending their gerrymander there. Then it was the efficiency gap only works in states with at least 8 districts. Such nonsense. Efficiency gap works as a measure in Oregon. It works in Utah. It works in New Mexico. Right, but we're not using the efficiency gap, Stewart. We're using partisan symmetry, which is a different calculation. YouTube comment from Julie and Tyson Farr Bradley. Do you think that the judge could throw out the maps because it only meets one criteria rather than many? Again, if you go back and look at the bill, Section 8 says the judge has to look at this partisan symmetry, has to use this analysis. And then they look at everything else. So as long as, it has to pass this first, it has to pass the partisan symmetry first, and then they look at all the other parts of Prop 4. So they're not repealing Prop 4. They're just rewriting it in a way to advantage them. And this is the really funky part about the whole thing, okay? You're not allowed to use partisan data to draw the maps. And Senator Sandel was very clear about that. Like I said earlier, he really shut down any discussion that could be seen as partisan. But then you have to use partisan data to assess the maps afterwards. So you can't use partisan data to draw them, but you have to use partisan data to assess them afterwards. It's this weird, twisted pretzel logic. Stuart comes back. I know I'm just saying that was Brammer's justification for why they can't use the efficiency gap. Yeah, exactly. This was a case where they reverse engineered something to meet whatever was their predetermined outcome. That's a sense that I get from people who know this a lot better than I do. I'm not a political scientist. I just pretend to be one on live stream. Oh, other comments. Let me scroll through Instagram. We're behind this. John Collins, art. This is totally infuriating, right? Exactly. What method should we be advocating for? Efficiency gap and what else? Again, I'm not as well versed. I know efficiency gap is the people that I talk to who are experts on redistricting, they trust the efficiency gap, and I trust what they say because they know what they're talking about. And most of the time I don't. So, when we call our state representative, what's the best way to advocate against Brammer's bill? Well, you need, make sure that you let them, again, okay, I'm not an activist. They like to paint me as an activist because I point out things that they don't want pointed out, and so that makes me an activist. I'm not an activist, but I have learned that one of the effective things to do when you reach out to your lawmakers, if you want to reach out about this, is to let them know that you are a constituent. They get pounded by emails. They get there's an avalanche of emails when stuff like this happens. And a lot of it doesn't come from the districts, and it's the same thing over and over again. This is something I've been watching for years. There's a lot of really fringy groups in the state who have a lot of pull. They're not very big, but they have a lot of influence. Think about Utah Parents United. They're not a huge group, but they have a lot of influence. And the reason why is they're there. They go up to the legislature. They're there every single day. Now, it helps that their goals and their policy preferences align with what lawmakers want to do anyway. Oh, some guy on TikTok says, isn't this little news network part of the alt-left? Little news network, I'll take it. Alt-left, I'm just your friendly neighborhood journalistic curmudgeon. And I'm not very friendly at that. Emeth on Instagram, it's wild how Republicans have the energy to work out these mental gymnastics. Here's the thing you need to understand. This is not coming from here in Utah. None of this is run in their states. It is a national thing on both sides. Republicans have their gerrymandering and redistricting experts and their teams that they lean on, and Democrats have the same thing. And the moment Utah's maps were thrown out, the Republican machine swung into action. And this is not being run here, and these ideas are not coming from here, and these maps are not coming from here. These maps did not come from here in 2021. These maps did not come from the maps we had in 2011 did not come from here. They were dropped in by the Republicans at the last second. I've talked to people who were part of that redistricting process in 2011. They were looking at maps and talking about maps, and at the last second, these maps were dropped by the RNC. allegedly, and those are the ones that passed. And the same thing happened in 2021. And I explained on a previous live stream how they did it, what rubric they used. Well, this time they're not using a rubric. This time they're just cooking the books after the fact so they can do whatever the hell they want. Oh, Speaker Mike Schultz just joined the stream on Instagram. Hi, Speaker. Can I ask you some questions here because you won't allow me to come to your press conferences? You know, I am suing you in order to get a press pass because you wouldn't let me have it. So I would love to have you come on the live stream and we can talk. Because I have some questions for you, Speaker Schultz. And yes, you right there, Mike Schultz had just joined the stream. So it's very nice to have you on board, Speaker Schultz. Appreciate it. Thank you for being a fan. I always knew you were. And Celeste on TikTok says, just got here. How do we keep Salt Lake City together? You're not going to be able to do, well, maybe Salt Lake City. You can go on and do your own maps. You can submit your own map. I don't know if they're going to look at it. Salt Lake County, there's no way to keep it together. And I would expect that they will find a way to divide Salt Lake City. It's a Democratic stronghold. But as I explained earlier, you have to you have to split Salt Lake County. You know what? I'm getting myself a screenshot of Speaker Schultz joining my live stream just for posterity. I'm going to put that out on social here in a little bit. Just make sure. Just got to record the fact that the Speaker of the House, who will not answer my texts, will not take my calls, won't speak to me, won't let me into his press conferences, join my live stream. That is awesome. Stuart makes a good point. It's not Salt Lake City whole. None of the maps split it. It's putting Salt Lake City with all of Mill Creek, Murray, South Salt Lake, West Valley City. They're going to have to, they're going to have to split that up. Emma Jolo on Instagram says, wait, was that real? Absolutely, it was real. Skanath Wasal, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, newsworthy enough for him to join, but not for you to get a press pass. No. And that lawsuit is still ongoing. We're waiting for the judge to issue a ruling in the case. And we've gone through this whole process at great expense to you taxpayers. This has cost you taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars to keep me from asking the speaker questions at his press conference. Emma Jolo says, I love that for you. I love that for me too. I know they're watching. They all subscribe to my newsletter. I see your email addresses when you subscribe. They like to pretend that I'm irrelevant, but they can't stay away. They can't quit me. Anyway, okay. This has been fun. I'm really enjoying this. This is the third time we've done it, and I'm planning on doing it again around this time. But let me ask you this, and please send me an email, send me your subjection, or send me an email, or on the socials. Does this time work? Does 6:30 work for everybody? Would you like it later? Would you like it earlier? I love getting on here and talking with you about what's happening in Utah politics, explaining it. I really enjoy the explaining part. Emeth says, can I give you holiday cookies? You're on my cookie list this year. Thank you for the offer, but I'm probably going to talk to me later. Okay, let's do this. This is on TikTok. Update on your federal lawsuit. I sat in one of the hearings, LOL. Well, there was one hearing. But where we are is we had a lawsuit. So they denied me a lawsuit. They didn't give me a press pass because, as we allege in our lawsuit, they changed the rules to specifically exclude me. So we filed a lawsuit, and the judge denied my request for a temporary restraining order, which would have given me a press pass. My lawyers felt that his reasoning was wrong, but anyway. So we decided to sort of regroup and readdress. But as part of this, we've all sat through, I've sat through a sworn deposition under oath, where they asked me all sorts of questions about my process being an independent journalist. And two of their people had to sit through sworn depositions where we got to ask them all sorts of questions. And let me tell you, those answers were interesting. Just one example before I leave. And I don't think I'll get in too much trouble for sharing this. But, take a drink here. But, their reasoning behind the new press pass rules, which specifically said that independent journalists do not qualify for a press pass. They said the reason they did that was to eliminate all discretion. Okay? If you're independent, you can't have a press pass. Boom, done. No discretion, no judgment. It's cut and dried. But they gave a press pass to an organization here in Utah that bills themselves as one of the top real estate blogs in the country. But blogs are independent. Blogs don't qualify. Blogs are not legitimate news outlets. They shouldn't qualify under the press pass rules. But they gave them a press pass. Why did they give them a press pass? Well, they decided to look into it more. That sure as hell sounds like discretion to me. Sounds like they used their discretion. Literally under oath, at one point, my lawyers asked one of their press representatives, what about Tucker Carlson? What if Tucker Carlson asked for a press pass? He's independent. He doesn't have an editor. He does what he wants. He covers what he wants. He writes the stories he wants. Would you give Tucker Carlson, independent journalist Tucker Carlson, a press pass? Now, if you look at the rules, the answer should be no. He's independent. That's not allowed. What did they say? We'd have to do more consideration. Okay. That's not what the rules say. Anyway, we can talk more about it, and I can and I'll tell more stories about that. But what we're doing right now is we're in a holding pattern. We were supposed to have a hearing in front of the judge last month. Shortly before that hearing happened, the judge canceled it and said he would be issuing a written statement, and we are waiting for that to happen. My fear is that the judge is just waiting. He's waiting to see what happens next year, to see if they give me a press pass next year. They should give me a press pass because Speaker Mike Schultz joined the stream a little while ago. I hope he's still there. Give me a thumbs up, Speaker Schultz, if you're still on the live stream. They should give me a press pass. But my fear is that they are waiting to see what happens next year before making any sort of a decision. And meanwhile, I'm not allowed to show up at their press conferences. And boy, do I have questions. Maybe I'll start doing that. Maybe I'll start publishing a list of questions that I would really like to ask or I think need to be asked at these events. Anyway. Okay, I think I'm spent. I think that's enough for this evening. Let's do it again tomorrow. Let's meet tomorrow again at 6:30, if that works for you. Someone said not during Maddow. I don't watch cable news that much. Is Maddow on at 7? Is she on at 7 or is she on at 8? I don't know. Sure, that's fine. But let's do it again tomorrow at 6:30. Let's get together and talk. In the meantime, I would like to encourage you to sign up for my newsletter, you can go to my website, utahpoliticalwatch.news. My newsletter, I send all of my journalism directly to your inbox. Most of it is free. Most of it is absolutely free. Every morning I do publish an email called the Morning Memo, and that is some of the things I'm thinking about, some of the stories you should be paying attention to, a little bit of political analysis, and then the headlines of the day. That one's for paying subscribers only. I have a podcast that you can subscribe to. It's called Special Session with Brian Schott. Follow me on my socials. You can find those on the website as well, utahpoliticalwatch.news. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email or send me a DM or comment anywhere, and I'll try to get to it. I love interacting with you people, and you people are great. This has been fun. I'm really having fun doing this, and I'm really glad that you're responding. Kelly Mousley on Instagram says, interestingly, the feds have also creatively eliminated legitimate press to cover the White House. Oh, yeah. They've got Tim Pool covering the White House. If you don't know who Tim Pool is, you're lucky. Carrie Mousley says, Maddow is Mondays at 7 p.m., so I'm skipping Maddow. Maybe we'll go a little bit early on Mondays. Maybe we will do that. I can work around Maddow. I know some of you are missing Maddow and you've already left. That's fine. But also, there's something called a DVR, then you can skip all the commercials. That's the way it works for me. So anyway, again, go to my website, sign up for my newsletter, utahpoliticalwatch.news. If you don't want to do that, follow me on my socials. You'll get all my journalism in your inbox. And I'm an independent journalist, okay? And what that means, I don't have a billionaire backing me. They're not paying for this. The people who are paying for this, or the way I pay for this, is readers. Readers are supporting what I do. People who value what I do enough to either get us paying subscription or by making a one-time donation, which you can do on my website. That's what keeps me going. That's what funds this. And it's a little scary. It's tough. It's a grind. It's a slog that I have to do this, that I have to rely on that. But the good thing is, when I see stuff that happens to like Jimmy Kimmel, although he's getting back on the air tomorrow night, thank God, what a win for the First Amendment. I was so happy when I read that news because, man, oh man, that was, I mean, it was starting to smell a little fashy in here, if you know what I mean. But that also means that when stuff like that happens, I'm immune to stuff like that happening. I can't be fired. The people who can fire me are my readers. If they don't like what I are my readers, are the people who help support my journalism. If they don't like what I do anymore, they just cancel their subscription. And that's how I get fired. So it's a trade-off, I've got a lot of freedom and I can be outspoken and I can really try to hold people accountable without fear or favor. But I also have to depend on people. I'd have to depend on my readers who value what I do. So if you can, I know times are tough, but if you can, go to my website, become a paying subscriber for as little as $5 a month. We also have a Discord. Paying subscribers get access to our Discord, and we're having some pretty great discussions about redistricting over there. Love to have you join us. If you become a paying subscriber, you can do that or make a one-time donation. Okay, that's my sales pitch. That's the end of it for this evening. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank Speaker Schultz for showing up. That was awesome. Love to have you back anytime. Stream is available for you. Let's do it again tomorrow night at 6:30 to talk about what the heck is happening in Utah politics. I appreciate every single one of you watching. I appreciate your questions. It's awesome. You people are great. Have a great evening. Love you all.